According to the FTC, next to identity theft, complaints about debt collectors were the most common complaints they received in 2010. And that's a 17% increase from just 2009. So we know that this is happening more often. Thing is, profane, abusive, insulting, or threatening language is all illegal, according to the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act. So why are debt collectors getting away with all of it? And what can you do if you're a victim? Here to discuss this with me is Delicia Reynolds, the Legislative Director at the National Association of Consumer Advocates. Delicia, thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Now, like I said, we can see by the numbers that the FTC is providing that these cases are starting to go up. But why do you think it's happening? Is it because of the recession and more people are in debt than we've seen in a really long time? Is it because the information is easier to obtain for some of these debt collectors because of the internet?
Well, I think you have to look at the larger context. If you look at the last recent year's economic growth and then downturn, the last few years' recession, you can see there have been some incentives for debt collectors. A lot of people forget about how debt plays out on the ground, which is there are huge incentives created by financial institutions, credit card companies around debt collection because debt was sold. We know the mortgages were broken up and sold. Credit card debt was also sold, basic consumer debt. And so what this created is a whole marketplace where debt is being sold. They're sold for pennies on the dollar. And what this means is there's a growing industry of companies who are out there with insufficient information and proof who are harassing consumers. And so they have every incentive, because they've bought some debt, haven't even verified it, to harass consumers on alleged debt that they owe.
So it's becoming this never-ending, horrible trickle-down effect, I guess you could say, from also some of the factors that built up to the financial crisis here. So now we have them purchasing debt. A lot of the information's wrong. They're harassing people, which, like I said, is illegal. So why do they get to keep doing that? Because the government isn't going after them, or are not enough people suing?
Well, unfortunately, this behavior is incredibly intimidating. Some of the abuses that we've seen out there, we've seen debt collectors calling people's relatives, calling their place of employment, frankly, even talking to people's neighbors and asking questions. So these intimidating practices often leave consumers feeling like they're helpless. But you're right, these practices are definitely illegal, and there's some things that consumers can do to protect themselves. But one of the reasons why you see this practice so rampant is because there's not enough enforcement mechanisms. The FTC can't catch up sufficiently to all the debt collectors that are out there. And frankly, by the time some consumers find out about a debt, their case has already been filed. In some cases, there's judgments against them, and those judgments are being collected against.
What are some of the worst examples that you've heard in terms of threats and these horrible things that these debt collectors say to people?
Gosh, they say all sorts of things. They purport to be government officials. So I've talked to consumers where they've received calls from the Department of Justice that doesn't even go after these types of claims, but they'll be on the phone where people are saying, yes, the Department of Justice has filed this claim against you, and if you don't work out a payment plan with us, we're going to file this claim against you tomorrow morning, and it's with the state attorney generals. I mean, they make up bogus claims, and they really intimidate persons. They'll call a person at their place of employment and ask to speak to their supervisor. I mean, they do all sorts of things. We've had situations where persons have been subject to racial slurs on the phone, gendered slurs, all sorts of abusive practice, all of which are illegal. Yeah,
we saw some of those examples in Marina's story just now too, and I've even read that sometimes they tell people that they should commit suicide, and I mean, if you look at it, some people actually have committed suicide over the massive amounts of debt that they have. So it's incredibly dangerous. And of course, if you listen to the debt collectors, their trade associations, they'll say that this doesn't represent their industry as a whole. These are just a few bad seeds. But is there any proof to that? I mean, like, do we know within their offices, are the debt collectors actually encouraged to threaten people?
I wouldn't say they're encouraged per se, but the lack of enforcement, frankly, there's nothing to stop them. There's, frankly, we've heard from industry experts that there's that these companies, they basically do a cost-benefit analysis, right? So there's a lack of enforcement out there, and they know that these threatening behaviors get them the results that they want. All it takes is one horrible phone call where someone's yelled at, screamed at, cursed at, and they'll get the results
and
that
they get the money. It's ridiculous. But how do you think that makes Americans feel? I mean, we were just talking about today, we've reached our debt ceiling in this country, but the government just gets to use a few extraordinary measures. They always get to push it on, pass it on, and we just keep raising our debt limit rather than actually paying any of it back. And yet they're going after people so aggressively over what, you know, could be just a few dollars. How do you think that makes people feel?
I mean, it makes people feel utterly hopeless, especially if you think about what's happened in recent years with the foreclosure crisis. Americans were pushed to consume. Post 9/11, one of the ways that you frequently heard our leaders talk about how they could support the economy was to spend more, right? And so the recession also, you know, it didn't just hurt the banks, it hurt consumers who are unemployed, who were pushed into situations where they could only pay their bills on credit, right? You have consumers paying medical bills on credit, rent, mortgages on credit, and now when they need to be bailed out, you know, they're told that
no one's going to be there to help them. I can imagine I'd be really angry if I was in that situation. Thanks so much for joining us tonight.
No problem. Thank you.